staying with us. As you can recall, trafficking in persons has been an issue for Guyana for some time now. We've had major back and forth on this issue. Even with the previous administration, we had people denying whether it existed in Guyana or not. Then we got various reports from the U.S. State Department on trafficking in persons. So we've heard much about it, but of course help is on the way. We've already begun to see the improvements, the progress and so on in terms of addressing trafficking in persons. Still much need to be done, and of course the government of the day is ensuring that much is done. On Wednesday the 18th of January, that would have been last Wednesday, there was the launch of the National Plan of Action for the Prevention and Response to Trafficking in Persons in 2017 to 2018. Now, this is a program that is based on what has been reported thus far. It's going to be 1 year, but of course, I'm sure there would be follow-ups after that. In this program, this plan of action, 7 of our government ministers are a part of that, including the Minister of Social Protection, the Minister of Public Security, also I think the Minister of Amerindian Affairs and so on. 7 ministers are a part of it. I'll get the exact number and names and let you know about that next week. But just to remind you, trafficking in persons is modern-day slavery involving victims who are forced, defrauded, or coerced into labor or sexual exploitation. Of course, and trafficking in persons in Guyana is governed by the Combating of Trafficking in Persons Act 2005 and came into effect on the 7th of April 2005. The Act provides for offenses, the major one of which is trafficking in persons. Section 3 of the Combating of Trafficking in Persons Act 2005. Trafficking in persons includes engaging in or assisting another person to engage in or organizing or directing other persons to engage in trafficking in persons. That is just to give you an idea of what it is that we're dealing with and remind you of how serious and important this issue is. What I'll do now is ask you to take a look and listen to some of the sentiments made by His Excellency, the President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, Brigadier David Granger, in the feature address that he made at that launch last Wednesday. This is Facing the Nation.
This noble project. Madam Chairperson.
Yes, Ms.
Honorable Comrade Ramjatan, Vice President and Minister of Public Security. Minister Amna Ali, Minister of Social Protection, Minister Walter Lawrence, former Minister of Social Protection, Minister Valerie Lowe, Minister in the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples Affairs, Madam Chief Justice Yonette Cummings Edwards, Madam Shalimar Ali Haq, Director of Public Prosecution, Chief of Staff of the Guyana Defense Force, Commissioner of Police, Ambassador Perry Holloway and members of the Diplomatic Corps, senior officials, special invitees, members of the media. Since I'm the last to speak, I have the opportunity to repeat everything that's been said before. So just relax. Trafficking in persons is a serious crime and a grave violation of human rights. It's a crime against humanity. It constitutes a form of modern-day slavery. It is an affront to civilized society, a denial of human rights, particularly of freedom from human servitude. Trafficking in persons, despite its abhorrent character, as you've heard, is one of the fastest growing criminal enterprises in the world today. It has transnational dimensions. The International Labour Organization estimates that more than 21 million persons are victims each year, victims of forced labor. There is, however, in Guyana a legal framework. The Constitution of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and the laws of Guyana explicitly prohibit trafficking in persons. Guyana is a state of laws. Laws are effective, however, only to the extent that people are educated to recognize and respect them, and that the means exist to enforce those laws. The Combating of Trafficking in Persons Act of 2005 designates trafficking as a crime punishable under law. But laws are not enough. There's need for a practical plan, and that's why we're here today. A plan equipped with effective measures to combat and eliminate trafficking in persons. Persons who are victims or potential victims of trafficking are entitled to the protection of the law. It is the state's duty to protect its citizens. The Constitution, at Article 139, provides that no person shall be deprived of his or her personal liberty, save as may be authorized by law. At Article 140, it states that no person shall be held in slavery or servitude. At Article 142, it states that no person shall be required to perform forced labor. At Article 141, it states that no person shall be subject to torture, inhuman, or degrading punishment or other treatment. The laws of Guyana, therefore, make it abundantly clear, from Articles 139 to 141, that any form of enforced labor, forced labor, is abhorrent. As you've heard before, in 2005, the Combating of Trafficking in Persons Act was passed, and you already heard the definition of that act. The state of Guyana, further, is signatory to the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime and to the Protocol to Prevent, Suppress, and Punish Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children. The three objectives of the protocol are to prevent and combat trafficking in persons, paying particular attention to women and children, to protect and assist the victims of such trafficking with full respect for their human rights, and to promote cooperation among states parties in order to meet those objectives. This ceremony today is particularly important to me. I recall that as leader of the opposition in the National Assembly, I brought a motion on Wednesday, the 22nd of May, 2013, 4 years ago, calling for the establishment of a commission of inquiry to investigate the crime of trafficking in persons. I urged the government of the day to lift the veil on trafficking in persons and to stop denying that the crime was taking place, denying that it needed to be eliminated. I added then that denial of the existence of trafficking in persons in Guyana makes matters worse, and I quote, "There's a syndrome of dodging the problem and pretending that the persons who are being trafficked have voluntarily entered into a state of prostitution." I told the National Assembly then that trafficking in persons was a form of modern-day slavery. I warned that trafficking was a crime of international jurisdiction and culprits could be prosecuted for it in any part of the world. That motion, titled Appointment of a Commission of Inquiry to Investigate the Incidents of Trafficking in Persons in Guyana, was approved by the National Assembly. But to our country's shame, it was never assented to and it was never implemented by the national president at the time. However, things were to change. I was sworn in as president on the 16th of May 2015, 2 years after. And I immediately changed the name of the Ministry of Human Services to that of the Ministry of Social Protection. I also changed the name of the Ministry of Home Affairs to that of the Ministry of Public Security. As you can see, they sit to the left and right of me at the table. Advisedly. I did so because I wanted to emphasize the state's responsibility for the protection of its vulnerable citizens and the security of the public. And neither of the two ministers have ever questioned the titles of their new ministries. Those ministries, I'm happy to say, are before you in the forefront of the struggle to ensure that trafficking in persons is eliminated. Ladies and gentlemen, the United States Department of State's Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons every year issues an annual dossier which reports on trafficking in persons around the world. The government of Guyana in past years, regrettably, has failed to implement the report's recommendations. It has denied the validity of the reports, disparaged its findings, and dismissed them. My sense of decency prevents me from repeating some of the language used to describe previous issues of the report. The government of Guyana today is solving the problem, not suppressing bad news. We are successfully prosecuting traffickers. We are collaborating with counter-trafficking non-governmental organizations, international organizations, and friendly countries. We are strengthening the interministerial coordination of our efforts. As I pointed out, 7 of the 15 ministries in our cabinet are represented in the task force. We are financing a shelter and enhancing psychosocial services to victims. We have this year started the establishment of a corps of wardens, and these wardens will be going into mining and logging settlements and along border areas where trafficking has been prevalent. Ladies and gentlemen, the National Plan of Action Against Human Trafficking, the launching of which we witnessed today, is the executive's response to the need for the effective enforcement of the laws prohibiting trafficking in persons. Human trafficking must be confronted fearlessly, frontally, and fully. The legal proscription against human trafficking must be backed by a plan of action aimed at eventually eliminating trafficking from our homeland. The previous administration's efforts to combat trafficking in persons often reflected the notorious indifference of indecisiveness to the crime. The seriousness of the crime was de-emphasized. Few efforts were made to combat trafficking in a systematic way. In fact, on one occasion when an adverse report was presented, they wrote their own report. That is very unhelpful. It's like a delinquent student carrying his own report home to school. He passes everything, gets A's. The government of Guyana today is committed to reversing this indifference towards the crime of trafficking in persons. We will do so by enhancing education and by strengthening enforcement in order to eliminate the scourge entirely. The strict enforcement of human trafficking laws requires action on a wide range of fronts, sensitizing the public to the effects of trafficking in persons and building institutional capacity to enforce the law. An effective plan of action to combat human trafficking must have at least 2 main objectives. First, education. Public education, understanding, and support are vital to success in eliminating the crime. Trafficking in persons is not fully or clearly understood by the average citizen and is often confused with backtracking, which in Guyana is a pastime in certain regions. I can't call the name of the region because the Vice President is here. But it is regarded as a sort of joke. And I think that attitude is taken from backtracking into trafficking in persons. The public needs to understand that the range of offenses defined as human trafficking must have the effect of law enforcement if we are to overcome the scourge. Public education, therefore, is important since human trafficking is usually an underground activity and it seems to be more pronounced in some of the hinterland areas which are difficult to police simply because the police force does not have the resources. When you consider Region 7, the Cuyuni-Mazaruni region alone, that's bigger than the Netherlands. And you can imagine the difficulty the police force would have to patrol that area. The Rupununi region alone is bigger than Costa Rica. You simply don't have the resources. But we are trying to give Mr. Sila Al-Passad the means to do so effectively. The second requirement for this plan, as you've heard, is enforcement. Traffickers must be identified and prosecuted with the full force of the law. The fear of prosecution must serve as a deterrent against human trafficking. The United Nations General Assembly passed resolution, as you've heard, 68192, titled Improving the Coordination of Efforts Against Trafficking in Persons on the 18th of December 2013. The resolution called on member states of the United Nations to address the social, economic, cultural, political, and other factors which make people vulnerable to trafficking. Guyana, as Minister Ali has said, seeks to provide a good life for all of its citizens. That good life includes protecting vulnerable citizens from the threat of servitude, the threat of sexual exploitation, and the threat of forced labor. Victims of trafficking in persons need protection. They are often helpless. They are often afraid to speak out. They often lack the resources and they seek assistance. They need assistance. Many of the victims are being held against their will. They may be illegal immigrants and might be afraid to go to the authorities for fear of being deported or prosecuted. Victims of trafficking in persons must be provided with assistance to help them to recover and to help them to reintegrate into society. This morning, therefore, I'd like to congratulate the Ministry of Public Security and the Ministry of Social Protection for their work to develop this national plan of action. Collectively, it is our duty as officials and citizens to make this plan work. We now have the evidence of government's resolve to rid our country of the scourge of trafficking in persons. Let us not drop the ball. Thank you very much.
Of course, what you would have been listening to there and watching would have been the feature address by the President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, His Excellency Brigadier David Granger, as he addressed the gathering at the Wednesday, 18th January 2017 launch of the National Plan of Action for the Prevention and Response to Trafficking in Persons 2017 to 2018. And I'd also like to remind you that 7 ministers are on that plan of action, that task force to address trafficking in persons. And just to give you some additional information, because I know as citizens, we only focus on these things when they, hit home or come close to you, as, some of our senior citizens like to say, you don't wait until rainfall on your doorstep before you address something. So just to give you some additional information, there are also other offenses provided for in the Act. Of course, the Trafficking in Persons Act, the Act that I read to you earlier. There are also other offenses provided for in the Act, such as unlawful withholding of identification papers, which is a strictly summary offense and also carries mandatory imprisonment for not more than 5 years, together with a fine for $1 million. This is just, as I said, for the purpose of giving you information. So congratulations to the government of Guyana as they take on the task of trying their very best to, if not eliminate, reduce the incidences of trafficking in persons in our nation. And I'd like to use this opportunity to remind families and friends to look out for your loved ones. Give an extra eye, give an extra ear out for them, because there are unscrupulous persons who prey on what they see as weak, but I prefer to call them vulnerable. There are always those vulnerable sections in society, and most often it's our women and our children. So we need to keep that extra ear and that extra eye out to protect those who belong to us. Just some housekeeping matters, of course. This is a new year of Facing the Nation. One of the things we're introducing in the new year is on a monthly basis to have the minister within the Ministry of Public Infrastructure on the program. As you know, our public infrastructure affects all of us. It either affects all of us and all of us benefit from it. So what will be happening beginning next week, it's going to be in the last Friday of every month, of course. We'll have the minister within the Ministry of Public Infrastructure, Ms. Annette Ferguson, She will be on air to talk about what the ministry, the Public Infrastructure Ministry, would have achieved in terms of infrastructural development each month. We're going to start off with that minister. We're going to try our best to see if we can get the same sort of reporting coming from other ministers. Of course, when you're going to school, there's a report card that is often produced by whether it be your class teacher or your head teacher. So what we're going to be doing is every month getting a sort of a report card from the Ministry of Public Infrastructure. So the minister within the ministry will be here herself the last Friday in every month. That is beginning next Friday, of course, and you will be able to see what is being done as the weeks go by in each month, because her PR team will also be providing some of the video footage to help you with that. On the note of public infrastructure, I'd like to take this opportunity, because when there are negatives, which I'm going to talk about, and a particular negative that happened this morning, when there are negatives, I highlight them. So when there are positives, I have to highlight them. There's still much more improvement for both the traffic ranks and the general staff at the Demerara Harbour Bridge, but they have been trying their very best to monitor and, direct the traffic there at the Harbour Bridge, especially the morning traffic. But much more needs to be done. For example, the traffic ranks needs to step it up a bit, because for those of you who use the bridge, there is that hour in the morning. I think it's from 7 to about 7:30. Once it goes on schedule, or to about 7:35, there is the double lane that opens for the traffic that's coming from across the river to pass freely before the traffic that's coming from this side, Region 4, to go across. So what happens when that double lane closes off? There is only one lane that is allowed to go across. Now, this morning there was a fender, compared to the terrible accidents that we usually have on our roads, I call this a fender bender. That happened on the bridge this morning while coming across, because the double lane was already closed off, and several drivers actually, but this unfortunate one decided that he's going to come on the outside lane where he's not supposed to be driving, and of course forced his way in front of a vehicle. Unfortunately, or unfortunately for me, I saw the whole thing, and I really felt for both drivers, because he is wrong to try to stick himself in, and sometimes we act as though these vehicles are cotton. We force them in at any crack that you're not using proper judgment. So unfortunately for him and the other driver, he tried to stick himself into the line. And of course, the driver behind him hit him from the rear. Fortunately, it was just a fender bender. Nobody was injured. But what I'm saying, this is going to cost money, because people can tell you every day, a simple thing as a scratch would cost you thousands of dollars to fix. And we keep giving, I think, what we call them, the body workshop guys and the mechanics, we keep giving them a whole lot of money. A simple scratch causes you thousands of dollars. And something like that occurred on the bridge this morning could have been avoided if only our drivers stick to the rules. And again, traffic ranks, you need to keep an eye out for them, because it really is unfair for someone who is in that traffic for more than an hour to have to allow somebody to just come from behind and squeeze in. And again, we're squeezing in as though our vehicles are tissue or cotton. So this is very, very serious business. It could have been worse. Thank God that it wasn't. So drivers, please, this is a new year. Please be very careful on the road and stop taking stupid chances. You're already late. You didn't get in the line in time to get the double lane. Don't try to rush it. The next time, leave home earlier, prepare earlier, organize yourselves earlier, of course, or just tell your boss, unfortunately, you didn't get the double lane. Most of you, your bosses would already know by now where you live, so I expect some bending on their part too. But you of yourselves as a driver, you have to take some of the responsibility, be a little more scheduled with your timings so that you wouldn't inconvenience yourself, inconvenience others, damage vehicles, and even injure people. Unfortunately, that's just about all the time I have with you this week on Facing the Nation. As always, thank you very much for tuning in. Last week, I know I did promise you the Vice Chancellor of the University of Guyana, Professor Ivelaw Griffith. But I'm promising you again that he will definitely be here next week. He had some scheduling clashes, so he'll be here next week. So next week, expect the Vice Chancellor of the University of Guyana, Professor Ivelaw Griffith, and of course, Minister within the Ministry of Public Infrastructure, Ms. Annette Ferguson. This has been Facing the Nation. I am Malika Ramsey. Take good care of yourselves and, of course, each other. And join me again next week. Goodbye.